This is Kol Birama, the podcast of Congregation Ramat Raz 929 Tanakh Project. Join us each day as we study a chapter of Tanakh, building towards completing all 929 together. I'm Rabbi Yoni Zolti, and I'm glad you're here. Shemot chapter 19. As the divine presence prepares to descend upon Har Sinai for the momentous revelation of the Torah, Moshe receives what appears to be fundamentally contradictory divine instructions. On the one hand, he is commanded to establish the strictest boundaries around the mountain. And you shall set bounds for the people around, saying, "Guard yourselves, lest you go up on the mountain or touch its edge. Anyone who touches the mountain will surely die." Yet at the same time, this emphatic prohibition is immediately followed by an apparently contradictory permission. Bimshoch hayovel hema ya'alu v'har. When the horn sounds long, they shall ascend the mountain. How can this be? Are they to ascend the mountain or not? The interpretive dilemma becomes even more perplexing when we consider that the shofar blast features prominently during the very theophany when the mountain is supposedly forbidden. Are the Israelites expected to ascend during the divine revelation itself? This question may appear to be rather technical, but through exploring it, I hope to demonstrate something profound about the essential nature of Maamad Har Sinai. There are several classical exegetical responses. In one interpretive tradition, preserved by Saadia and Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and grounded in Talmudic sources, the permission to ascend refers to an entirely different shofar blast, one to be sounded subsequently by Moshe himself well after the theophany has concluded. Ibn Ezra articulates this position well. When Moshe sounds the shofar, then they will be permitted to ascend. And this was after Moshe descended from the mountain on Yom Kippur and commanded that the Mishkan be built. In other words, the solution to the problem is that during the theophany, they would be forbidden from ascending the mountain, but after the theophany, another different shofar blast will be heard, and they can climb then. While intellectually ingenious, this interpretation encounters a significant textual obstacle: the complete absence of any such subsequent shofar blasts in the narrative record. Given the meticulous attention the Torah devotes to ritual details throughout this entire Sinaitic experience, the silence regarding this supposedly climactic signal proves deeply problematic. An alternative approach emerges from Rashbam, Bekhor Shor, and Chizkuni, who propose a subtle reinterpretation of the critical phrase Bimshoch hayovel. Rather than understanding that this refers to the duration of the shofar blast itself, they suggest that it indicates the moment of cessation. In other words, that the people will be permitted to ascend only after the shofar sound has ended and the divine presence has departed from the mountain. This interpretation is certainly logically coherent. The prohibition exists precisely during the period of divine occupancy, clearly demarcated by the supernatural acoustic manifestation that accompanies the Shekhinah's descent. Once the symphony concludes, then the mountain sacred status presumably returns to ordinary and permits renewed human approach. However, this interpretation encounters a formidable obstacle when we examine the parallel usage of this same language elsewhere in Scripture. During the conquest of Yericho, we encounter a virtually identical phrase. "V'haya bimshoch b'keren hayovel b'shomachem et kol hashofar yariu kol am trua gedola." And it shall be that when they make a long blast with the horn of the yovel, when you hear the sound of the shofar, all the people will shout with a great cry. This context unambiguously demonstrates that the moment of the shofar sounding, the walls of Yericho would collapse and the people will immediately advance. Thus, this syntactical evidence would severely undermine this cessation interpretation of Rashbam, instead suggesting that Bimshoch hayovel refers to during the blast, not after the blast. Faced with these interpretive challenges, my teacher, Professor Jonathan Grossman, has proposed a remarkably elegant solution that honors both the text's simple plain meaning and its broader theological architecture. Rather than seeking refuge in temporal displacement or grammatical contortions, Grossman suggests that we should read the verse according to its most straightforward interpretation. While the shofar blasts during Maamad Har Sinai, Bnei Israel are to ascend the mountain and encounter the divine directly. This interpretation draws crucial hermeneutical insight from the striking structural parallels between the Sinai revelation and the conquest of Yericho. In both narratives, the extended blast of the shofar serves as a divine signal for human approach to a sacred location where Shekhinah has manifested its presence. Consider the remarkable prelude to the Battle of Yericho. In the previous chapter, Yoshua encounters a mysterious celestial figure who declares, Ani sar tzava Adonai ata bati. I am a captain of the Lord's host, now I have come. This strange divine commander instructs Yoshua with language that deliberately evokes Moshe's experience at the burning bush. Shal nalecha me'al raglecha ki hamakom asher ata omed alav kodesh hu. Remove your shoe from your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. This theological parallel is illuminating. Just as the burning bush's holiness derives from its destiny as the future site of divine revelation at Sinai, so too Yericho's sanctification emerges from the imminent manifestation of divine presence during the miraculous conquest. The structural symmetry, then, between these narratives reveals a consistent divine pattern. Just as the Israelites at Yericho were forbidden from attacking the city for several days, instead they encircled it daily without entering, until the shofar blast signaled divine authorization for approach, so too at Har Sinai, the prohibition against ascent applies during the preparatory phase, when the divine presence is descending and establishing itself upon the peak. The permission to ascend represents the divine invitation for direct encounter once the Shekhinah is fully manifested. The extended shofar blast serves as a cosmic signal that God has arrived and is prepared to meet his people face to face, just as the horn at Yericho announced the moment for the walls to collapse and the city to be entered. The profound significance of this interpretation cannot be overstated. According to this reading, the original divine intention envisioned not merely Moshe's solitary ascent, but the collective elevation of the entire nation to experience unmediated divine revelation upon the mountain itself. This radical interpretation receives support from Moshe's own retrospective analysis in Sefer Dvarim. When he addresses the generation preparing to enter the Promised Land, Moshe recounts, Panim bepanim diber Hashem imachem bahar mitoch ha'esh. Face to face, the Lord spoke with you on the mountain from amidst the fire. Anochi omed bein Adonai v'einechem ba'et hahi la'agid lachem et divar Adonai ki reitem mipnei ha'esh v'lo alitem bahar. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to tell you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid of the fire and did not ascend the mountain. Moshe's phraseology here proves crucial. He begins by asserting that God spoke panim bifanim, face to face with the entire people, establishing that the original divine intention encompassed direct encounter with the entire nation. Subsequently, he clarifies that he ended up serving as the intermediary because lo alitem bahar, you did not ascend the mountain, revealing that indeed the people were expected to make this ascent. However, as just noted, as the narrative ends up unfolding, we discover that this collective revelation never ends up materializing. The texts document that the people's response to the awesome theophanic manifestation was fear. The people feared and trembled and stood far off. They told Moshe, "Let God not speak with us lest we die." Instead of ascending the mountain for direct divine encounter as intended, the people's overwhelming terror led them to retreat and demand that Moshe serve as an intermediary. This fundamentally altered the entire structure of the revelation, transforming what was designed originally to be immediate divine human encounter into mediated communication. This failure of direct encounter may have precipitated the psychological and theological conditions which contributed to the subsequent crisis of the golden calf. Significantly, in the immediate aftermath of the revelation, there is a divine warning that seems almost anticipatory of the golden calf. Vayomer Adonai Moshe, God said to Moshe, Ko tomar b'nei Yisrael, atem ra'item ki min hashamayim dibarti machem. You have seen that I have spoken to you from the heavens. Lo ta'asun iti Elohei chasef ve'Elohei zahav lo ta'asu lachem. Do not make with me gods of silver or gods of gold. The repetition of this prohibition so immediately following the Decalogue suggests an acute divine concern regarding the people's capacity to maintain theological clarity given the absence of direct encounter. Without unmediated divine communication, the risk significantly increases that they might question the ultimate source of their religious obligations or seek alternative forms of divine access, precisely the psychological dynamic that will manifest in the Golden Calf episode. Shemot chapter 19 thus emerges as a narrative about the complex relationship between human limitation and divine accessibility. The chapter presents us with a God who desires immediate relationship with humanity, and yet must navigate the psychological and spiritual constraints that make such a relationship challenging. This interpretation reveals the profound tragedy embedded within the Revelation narrative. Not merely were the people afraid, but that their fear prevented the realization of the ultimate divine intention for human divine encounter. The mountain was prepared originally not as a barrier, but as a meeting place, and the shofar blast was not meant as a warning, but rather as an invitation. Thank you for joining today's learning. See you tomorrow for the next chapter of Tanakh.